This is Corey Cross.
This is Wade Redden.
Hi, this is Braden Holtby.
Hi, this is Scott Hartnell.
My name is Jim Pattison.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carly Agro from Sportsnet Central.
Hey, it's Ron McLean, Hockey Night in Canada and Rogers Hometown Hockey.
Hello, Lloydminster. This is Keith Morrison, and welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Now, let's get on to the T-Bar 1 Tale of the Tape. Originally from Vernon, New Jersey, at the age of 18, she spent 2.5 years solo circumnavigating the world in a 26-foot sailboat. She practically had no sailing or navigation experience when she started. She did not have a GPS to guide her, but instead had to trust the use of a sextant or celestial navigation. Just to put that in perspective, for 30 months she traveled 27,000 miles, and her guide was the sky above. She wrote a 1989 bestseller, Maiden Voyage. I'm talking about Tania, Aebi. So buckle up. Here we go.
This is Tania, Aebi. Welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Hey, well, welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast. Today I'm joined by Tania, Aebi. I hope I got that right. And well, first, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I was saying I stumbled across your story, and what I really enjoyed about it is it reminds me of when we biked Canada, because we'd never really biked that far before, and then one day we just decided to buy some bikes, travel to the opposite side of the country, and start pedaling and see what happened. And you learn a lot about yourself going that way. Now, for you, it's a little more a longer journey. You were a couple of years younger, and I just thought maybe we could just start with how on earth this idea comes up to circumnavigate solo the world.
It was my dad's idea. I was 17 when he thought of it, so I didn't have the imagination, or I didn't have the imagination to come up with that possibility. He's the one that saw that and made the offer, and then I guess I was the one that took it up.
But you didn't grow up sailing, did you?
No, that's why I didn't grow up on boats. I didn't know boat people. I didn't know that whole world out there. So it was only when my dad bought a boat when I was about 16, a friend of his had been building he immigrated to the States with his friend Christian. They came from Paris on the Queen Mary in 1966, a couple months before I was born. So I could have been born in Paris, but instead I ended up being born in New Jersey. And Christian, they went their separate ways. They were both artists, but he was always in our life. And he bought a boat when I was about 12, a bare hull, and started building it. And he's still building it. So that's 44 years later. He's still not finished. It's been the journey, not the destination for him. But in those beginning years, my dad was intrigued by the whole idea of sailing. I mean, this was Christian's passion, and my dad was watching, and he started looking at the sailing magazines and decided, did you freeze up?
No, I can hear everything perfectly. So obviously my connection isn't coming to you, but you're coming through beautifully to me.
No, you're coming into me, but you have to say every once in a while, because all of a sudden it'll look like you froze or something. And the Zoom, like I said, the Zoom doesn't work so well here.
I tell you what, if all of a sudden I start barking, it's because I'm not listening anymore. I'm enjoying the journey, Tania. So fire away, please.
God. So I have Zoom PTSD. It keeps crapping out on me when most inconvenient. So anyway, so he started reading the sailing magazines and decided he wanted to try it too. He's always been an adventurer at heart. He's done a lot of traveling. He did tons of traveling before he had kids, and he wanted to pick back up where he left off, but in a new way. And he bought a boat in England, and I went with him. I was in the middle of I was coming out of my the worst of my teenage years. And we sailed from England to Spain to Portugal to Morocco to the Canary Islands. We crossed the Atlantic to the Caribbean. back up to New York. I spent a year on the boat with him when I was 16, 17, and he watched me just fall in love with the whole idea of sailing, of the ocean, the people out there. I really took to it. And he saw that happening. I mean, I was just living. He was watching how things were taking shape, and decided that he would make that offer to take it to the next level. My own boat, a solo trip around the world, because he only thinks big like that. And of course, I was impressionable and young and already knew that if I said no and didn't try that, I'd probably regret it for the rest of my life. So there was only one thing to do, and that was to try, because I didn't have any better ideas either.
Isn't that a crazy thing for a father to suggest at such a young age, and for you to know at a young age, if you turned it down, you'd regret it for the rest of your life?
Oh, 100%. I've had I have sons, two boys, and a couple years ago I had a boat and I wanted to bring it down to the Caribbean to sell it. And I asked my son if he could house it for me. Well, I did that, and he said, "Why don't I take it down?" So he had just graduated from college. He had a marine systems engineering, not just engineering, but marine systems engineering degree. My boat was 32 feet that I wanted to bring down, which was the 32 of the version of the 26 I had on my big trip, outfitted with the GPS and all a working engine. It was a boat, a bigger, nicer boat than I had. And it was in November though that he wanted to go down to the Caribbean, and that's when the storms start rolling in. And I was waiting for a good weather window to tell him when he could leave, and there just wasn't one. It was just gnarly out there. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I could hardly breathe. I couldn't have a focused conversation while I was waiting, thinking about, all I could imagine was his hypothermic body out there, until I pulled the plug. I didn't do it. I couldn't do it for my own son, who was older than me, more experienced than me, with a better boat. I still couldn't do it. So yeah, that makes my dad even crazier or more unusual or special, whatever it is.
Did you talk about? I'm sure you must have talked about with your dad after the trip was done, like the anxiety that he must have felt having you out there with no GPS. You mentioned no working engine. Um,
Yeah, you're assuming he's normal. That's the kind of conversation you'd have with a normal person. Obviously, my dad wasn't normal. To have done, I consider myself more normal, and the fact that I couldn't let my own offspring do that, my own son. My dad, I mean, yeah, we didn't have conversations like that. Of course, I was going to do it, and of course, he had anxiety sometimes, but that wasn't going to be anything to stop him for letting me do this. I mean, there was only one thing to do, and it was to do it, and it was to finish it.
well, let's talk then about your first day. Uh, I remember vividly my first day of hopping on a bike and it being broken, and us having to wait extra days in St. John's to get it fixed. How did your first day of leaving New York go?
Actually, my first day, I left New York with the all the farewell pictures, everything, the big farewell, and I only went 20 miles to the first Anchorage, and I spent a couple of days there because the engine broke on the way there. So I had to try and figure out how to get it going again before I actually left. So I spent a couple of days in an Anchorage just inside the entrance to New York Harbor, and waited for nicer weather. It was also raining on the day that the big farewell day. So I waited for nicer weather and fixed the engine and just got myself together, decompressed a little from all the pre-departure, the whirlwind, and then took off. So the first day out there, I guess, was nothing, it was a nice day. I left on a nice day and I pulled up the sails and it was beautiful and the waves were sparkling. And then it was the first trip as a whole was more of the aggregation of all the experiences on that first trip are what really stuck, because I had my first leaks. I had my first troubles with navigation. I had my first troubles with the engine breaking again and not being able to fix it. It was my first passage. It was the first everything. And most importantly, it was the first time I was out there by myself and realizing that I kind of liked it. That was, given all the other problems and how long it took to get to Bermuda, it took me like 3 times longer than it should have. But I liked it. I liked being out there, being the only person in the world that knew where I was any given moment. I was
What,
the
what,
boss. I was the boss of everything, in as much as you can be the boss of anything out in the middle of the ocean. I was boss. I liked it. There was a simultaneous feeling of power and complete like powerlessness at the same time, which was kind of cool. Going between the two.
Coming from a landlubber, because I sit in the middle of the prairies, the ocean terrifies me just because of the sheer power it has. And once you're out and about like yourself, like all I can hear in your story is like, man, didn't you just wake up one morning and realize like I'm on a 26-foot little boat in the middle of the ocean, and if any storm gets me, there ain't no coming back.
No, nothing ever happens in 2 seconds. Everything's gradual. A storm doesn't just come out of nowhere and build. It takes hours to get to a point, and hours in which you have time to prepare and take in the sails and shut down the hatches. And also, nothing lasts forever. And that was definitely a big lesson. It's like there was no beautiful weather that lasted forever, and there was no storm that lasted forever. There was no calm that lasted for everything. Everything passed. It was just a matter of waiting it out and doing what you had to do until it passed. And yeah, there were times where I sat out there and thought, geez, that's a big ocean out there. It's a big world, and I'm like a speck of nothingness in it. And like I said before, sometimes that was overwhelming, and then sometimes it was just so empowering to think, boy, I'm the boss of me here on the little boat crossing these oceans. How cool is that? Yeah, it was a roller coaster for sure. Sometimes I was, a wreck, crying, tired, lost, scared, and other times I was like elated, euphoric. This is beautiful. How special is this? It was a huge meditation. The ocean is the big wilderness too. So just because it's the ocean, if you don't know it, it's water and it's scary and it's mountains of water. But I mean, if you get lost in the wilderness, in the mountains, having to hike your way out or whatever, it's the wilderness, and it's actually the last wilderness. And even less so now than it was back when I was, because now you can be out there and you can have contact with land. There's all kinds of communications equipment that didn't exist when I was doing this.
Well, maybe talk just a little bit about how isolated you were, because I've had, even myself, I got 4 older siblings, 2 of which have traveled the world for extended periods of time, and just from their brief travels, the first one could email us back. By the second, by the time Harley went, he could Skype call us. So there was like this feeling of like you're gone, but I can still see you, which is a little bit of a warp for the brain, because you can actually see somebody. So it's almost like they never left, right? It's pretty crazy that I could sit here and do this with you. It's quite cool how far the world has come on this side of communication and being able to talk to somebody. But back in the 80s, a lot of that wasn't there. So maybe could you just talk a little bit about, like, as soon as you're out in the middle of the ocean, sailing away, having a grand old time, it's not like you could pick up the phone and go, "Hey, Dad, how's it going today?"
I don't know. I could talk about how much there wasn't back then. Once I left, that was it. The only communication I had with anyone, anytime, was with the VHF radio, which would emit as far as the horizon. So I had like a 10-mile range that I could talk to somebody else with on the radio. So if I saw a ship and they were listening to their radio, I could call them and have a conversation, but it would be about, the weather, and I'd get a position from them. That's communicating. So to call home, I had to get to shore, and back in those days too, you had to go to the post office or a telephone office and place a collect call, and you'd wait for the operator to get through, and then they tell you which cabin you could go in, which phone to pick up, and then you'd call home and have those conversations. And then, so they were just always just waiting for you to figure out when and where to make a call. So on the other end, they never knew where you were, what was going on. And it was entirely up to me to make that contact. For as far as navigation went, there was no, the sat nav existed back then, but it would never have worked on a little wet boat such as mine. So I didn't have that. It was a sextant, and it was a sextant with a little Casio electronic watch and the sun, the moon, and some navigation tables. Everything was pretty elemental. And that's what it was, right? It wasn't like, oh, I'm deliberately cutting myself off from, you could do that now, but it would be artificial. And you'd know about all the things you could have that you've deprived yourself of. Back then, you just didn't have it. So that's the way it was. Anybody that went off to sea on a boat went off completely cut off from contact with home. So yeah, the world has changed. I mean, imagine how much it's changed for somebody that's 100 years old.
Well, that's a lovely thing that I get to do, Tanya, from time to time. Every Sunday, I sit down with the older generation, ladies and gentlemen from the ages of 70 to as old as 95, and get to hear these. It's a different world, right? Stories from a different time with different things going on. And as we speed forward, the world ever changes, but you go back to a simpler time when, like you're saying, I find it just amazing what you accomplished. And
it
just
was simpler for in hindsight, right? Was it simpler back then? They didn't think it was simpler.
no,
They thought the time before then was simpler, maybe, if they did. I mean, it's all relative.
it's all relative. Yeah, I would agree 100% with you there. It's pretty cool that with just a few little instruments and the stars and the moon and the sun, that you could find little specks of land out in the middle of the ocean and be so like precise.
Yeah, it took a while to get precise about it, but that's what people did. That was one of the big conversations anywhere at every landfall with the other sailors, was talking about how they did the navigation. Everybody had a little trick that they would share, or something. There was the navigation discussion, which definitely doesn't happen anymore. And or the different ruler you could use. I learned a bunch of tricks out there from other people. I guess it's limited how many tricks there are, but I learned them. And it was, yeah, no, that's definitely something we've lost, because what comes with that also is suspense. Not knowing where you are every single second. Once a day, I knew where I was. Once a day, I'd have that fix where I had taken the two sights, the two lines of position from the sun, and plotted where I was. So only once a day could I make an actual X in the middle of all that water, designating I am here. And then the rest of that 24 hours were assumptions. Oh, I think I'm going on this course, and I think I'm making more or less this speed. And, I had no idea what currents were pulling me where. And once a day, I could find out exactly what that course was and how much my speed had been. And that was a high point of every day, was to get that, to figure out that position. And now, with the GPS, it's literally every second, what you're doing. It's a video game. You look at, you have a chart on this little phone is all I need now. Back then I needed charts, and I needed my sextant, and I needed a compass, and I needed dividers, and I needed parallel rulers, and some math kept the brain working too a little bit. Now I just put the map on the phone, and there's a little boat icon on there, and that's me. I'm just, and there's like an arrow pointing in front of me, pointing which direction I'm going, and it's pretty brainless.
You say a little bit of brain work. That to me, yeah. Well, to me, that's a lot of brain. Like, that really keeps you engaged. I can't imagine the pureness of that suspense. Like, that had to have been just absolutely terrifying at sometimes. And then to see on the horizon where you're aiming for coming into view must have been such happiness, joy. I don't know. Pop a bottle of champagne, relief. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I tell the story, there's the most of the landfalls had some kind of, at least a hill, if not mountains, that you could see from way offshore. So the hardest And so once you saw that shadow of land, as you got closer, more things would become more defined, and that could help you point in the right direction to where the harbor you were shooting for lay. But the big test of the navigation was in Australia. I had to find a lighthouse sticking up out of the reef, so there were no visual landmarks. It was just like literally finding a pencil sticking up in the middle of the ocean. So my navigation had to be pretty accurate to come up on that, and I did. That was
In
like
the,
the ultimate success.
in the middle of a storm, nonetheless, as I
Well,
recall.
storm came up after I found that lighthouse, and I started heading in between the reefs, and then the storm came in while I was coming in through the reefs, and then I went back out again and waited for the storm to pass before coming in to all that reefy water.
Because if you
Yeah.
tag one of those reefs, you're pretty much kaput.
Yeah, it's not good. You know, you don't want to hit a reef offshore, because if you hit a reef inside a lagoon while you're puttering around, it's just you'll crumble. The boat will crumble the reef. But if you crash onto a reef with the swells pushing you you're done.
You know,
Yeah,
I've had this thought lately that we keep kids for longer these
Oh,
days.
definitely.
Like, I hear your story and I go, well, you even said it. You couldn't send your older, more trained son with more technology out to do the same thing that your dad had done to you years before with less.
Yep. No, I'm not gonna say that people were less afraid. I mean, my dad was weird. My dad was unusual, and that's why I had this opportunity, because I had my father. And that's, it's on him here. In the end, I did it. Yes, I pulled it off and I made it back home, but it would have not been possible without him saying it was possible.
Yeah, but you say unusual and weird, which sure. I just wonder if he knew something, like when you look back at your life, that's a pretty big course change, right? You're heading here and then you just veer that way. Like, I mean, that is like almost a 180. But who else at 18 gets to experience something like that and learn what they're capable of?
Well, to use that metaphor, to be fair, I was he put me on a course. I didn't really have a course to change. At 18, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I didn't have a big plan. I actually just answered an email for some kid yesterday that asked me what I wanted to be when I was little. And I never wanted to be anything. I didn't have this big dream or this big push. I wasn't an inspired child. I wanted to have fun. I wanted to travel. I wanted to have friends. I didn't even have a plan to go to college. I didn't know what I was going to do if I went to college. I liked writing a little bit, but that was even, a little bit. It wasn't a passion. And my dad actually plotted a course by giving me this, and then I was on it. And that's actually something I've said a lot too, that it was a bit of a tumultuous childhood and adolescence in New York. It was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun being a young person in New York, but it wasn't really like setting a good, well, maybe it did, whatever. That wasn't a career path though. It was fun. And or a life path rather than a career. But giving me that trip, or having taken on that trip, gave me something for 2.5 years, which was unusual also, was a clarity of focus, a clarity that you don't have at that age. I mean, I could have continued to be unsure about what I wanted to do, but for 2.5 years, I knew I had to head west and head home. And that was every single morning I woke up and I knew what I had to do for 2.5 years. That's probably character building and life forming right there, having had that daily reinforcement of knowing what I needed to do. That was given to me. It wasn't something, people have that kind of drive. They have those passions that, and they know it. There's plenty of people, there are plenty of inspirational stories of people that are born with a drive or a passion or an interest or whatever it is that they have that keeps them going from day to day. It's that string that pulls them through life. I didn't have that, but this trip gave that to me.
I'll say this. Yes, there are people with that inner drive and know exactly what they want to do in life. That is my wife. Then there are people like you just, I don't know what I want to do. That was me. And things like what you just talk about, there's so many people that are going, I don't know what I want to do. Right. Like, and I look at all of everything you just said. There's more people that at that age are kind of like, I don't know, like, maybe I'm going to work over here. Maybe I'm going to do this. And they're just kind of waffling. And yet at 18, what you have to appreciate at that young age is that you're not tied down to anything. Like you could just pick up and go anywhere and live off a box of craft dinner because honestly, you don't need much else. And you don't have payments. And, I always think of where I am at today. And I love my life today. But 3 young kids at home, a job, a wife, which is all fantastic. I love my life. I'll say that again. But you just can't pick up and go somewhere. Can, it's just a little bit difficult. And you can't live off a box of KD. Yes, you can, but now you have other people to think about and kids and what you're going to do with school and blah, blah, blah. It just goes and goes. And at 18, when so many kids are going, I don't know what I want to do. They have the opportunity to do whatever they want, which is such a cool thing about that age. Because you have the ability, like you literally can do anything at that age and go anywhere and survive off of pretty much nothing.
Right. A lot of nothing. But I mean, I guess there's a thing about also seeing a door getting cracked open and then stepping through it instead of just walking past it. And I guess we all have doors and we all have choices that we make. I could have said no, and who knows where I would have been now. And many times during the trip, I felt like quitting. I'm like, what am I doing here? This was just abnormal. I should be in college making friends, networking, whatever. The grass is always greener. But then that moment would pass and I'd push through and keep going because in the end, it was a lot harder to quit than to keep going.
You had to have,
were hard.
You had to have met some absolute characters out on the sea. Like, I mean, at the ports. Like, I mean, there must have been the most fascinating people wherever you stopped.
I even met some characters at sea. So one time in the Red Sea, I met my husband out there on land, Olivier, and we sailed on the same trajectory from the South Pacific until the Mediterranean. So we met up in different harbors. So we had left Djibouti together. And then his boat lagged behind. It was slower. And by this point, we never tried to stay together. We didn't have the communications. We didn't have the lights, whatever. It was harder to try and stay within sight of each other than it was to just go and meet up at the next place. So I left. I was ahead of him and I lost him the first night. And then like 2 days out, I ran into another group of sailors, 3 other boats. And we stopped at outside of some reefs too. So we sailed up to Sudan in tandem. I stayed with them. And one guy towed my boat for a while when we had no wind. It was flat calm and my engine wasn't working. And they would turn on their engines and they tow me behind to keep up with them. And the total characters. But literally I met them at sea. There was no land involved. And then, on land, definitely. Lots of good stories, lots of inspiring stories, because everybody that's got out there had to leave behind a whole world to just head out to sea and to be on this boat with limited everything, especially back then. Boats have gotten bigger and much more luxurious now. You have air conditioning, you have every single entertainment system on the boat. You've got water makers, so you can use as much water as you want. And of course, all those things mean you have to fix more stuff because they're always breaking. But back then, people really lived with, you took off with 30 gallons of water and that had to last you for a month. And the same with all the rubbish you generated. You knew exactly what you made. You did. Yeah, it was a different person that was able to cast off the dock lines back then. And that made a lot of character meeting with characters.
What did you do for entertainment back then? Because you mentioned all the fancy entertainment they have now, right? Like the ability to have your phone and watch pretty much anything on it. What did you? I assume you read, yeah.
Tons. That's it. I read and I knitted and I crocheted. And then I stared at the water for hours, and the navigation, and then the cooking and the meals. I mean, there was the daily duties, got to eat, got to do the dishes, got to take care of the cat, got to clean up, got to, and then of course there was the sailing piece of it too. Don't forget that I had to do some sails and be on the boat.
What did you eat? What was the main meal that I assume, going out for that extended periods of time, you weren't taking, everything fresh and like I assume it was something that was easy storable and easy to cook and everything else.
That's like you said, macaroni and cheese. I didn't even have that. I guess I had some boxes of that stuff sometimes, but a lot of the places didn't have all those kinds of foods either. It was a lot of rice and a lot of tuna and a lot of tomato paste and onions. There were things like onions and garlic and cabbage and potatoes. Carrots got kind of rubbery. They didn't last that long. And then there were citrus fruits that could last a long time too. There were just these rooty things, and I made a lot of just in the pressure cooker, rice and onions and garlic, and then hot sauce made everything good, or like a little mustard. I'd have condiments that would really jazz up the days. It wasn't a culinary adventure, and I often feel like cooking. I did not gain weight on this trip, not an ounce.
I bet you got stronger though.
Got stronger, but then only certain kinds of strengths too. Like when I get to shore, your legs don't get a lot of exercise out there, especially on a little boat. There wasn't very much opportunity to stand and use the legs. So walking was, that was my exercise when I got to shore, because you have to walk everywhere.
When when you look at all the destinations you went through, and it was like 27,000 miles aboard a 26-foot boat. What's a couple or one of the destinations that just sticks out to you that you're like, man, that was a special place?
The French Polynesia. Depends where I'm, what memory gets triggered by what, but because there were a lot of special places and wonderful experiences, but French Polynesia was just geographically gorgeous. It was a beautiful place, and then the food was really good there, and I speak French, so it was fun to be in a place where I could be understood and culturally diverse and beautiful. And I spent also for like 4 months there out waiting hurricane season, so I really had an opportunity to get to know people and to get to know the place.
Oh crap, I hadn't even thought of hurricane season. Yeah, like that'd be something you'd be constantly paying attention to, I assume.
No, you know when it is, and the typical voyages avoid hurricane season. There's the time of year to cross an ocean, and then there's a time when you don't.
Well, I guess what I was meaning in a 2.5-year voyage, you're spacing yourself into when you can sail and when you have to be at a destination, harbored up, locked down and fixing the boat and making sure things are getting ready for the next journey or the next leg. And so you're probably spacing that out of when, listen, we can sail now and we got to make some miles, and we ain't sailing today because, man, she's nasty out there.
Well, the nastiness is a season thing. So, but that definitely kept me going were those seasons, and knowing that I was always a little behind too. I was always trying to catch up. I was never ahead of myself. I'm rarely ahead of myself, actually. I'm always facing a deadline, but always pull it off too. So, and then also, so I did a trip with the boys. Speaking of cutting off the dock lines when you get older with kids and everything. When the kids were teenagers, Nicholas was junior in high school and Sam was in 8th grade. I got a boat, a 36-foot steel boat in the Caribbean, and took them out of school for a year. And by then Olivia and I were divorced. So I did half the trip and he did half the trip. We took joint custody to sea. And I sailed with them from the Caribbean to French Polynesia. So we had our big ocean passage. We had 32 days at sea, I think, together, just the boys and I. Anyway, getting ready to do that trip, pulling it all off was probably, it was bigger to do than my first trip because I had those boys to worry about their safety, their happiness, everything. I was worried like all the time. There was never a moment when I wasn't worrying and stressing out about their safety. But what I did do too, just to add to the worry, was we crossed the Pacific at the beginning of hurricane season. So the Eastern Pacific, the hurricanes in the Pacific are more on the western half of it. So coming across from Panama to the French Polynesia, there's virtually no hurricanes, and it was a La Nina year too. But we were in Panama and then in the Marquesas and then French Polynesia completely off season. It was hurricane season. So there were no boats there. So we actually ended up having an experience much more like the one I'd had 30 years earlier without the harbors being filled with boats, because now people go in season and they go in flotillas, and every harbor is just at the right time of year when it's the right time season wise, they're just chock full of boats. And there's no room to anchor anymore. But then at that time, the boys and we had every anchorage to ourselves. So it was a mixed blessing. I took the chance of going in hurricane season and keeping a very close eye on the weather. So I had a shortwave radio, and I was able to download weather forecasts, and I did that constantly and obsessively. But we also then had a qualitatively different experience as far as being the only people where we went.
You as a teenager got to go with your dad for a year on a boat, and then you got to impart the same kind of experience on your kids. What was the being in your dad's shoes, so to speak? How was that? Like, did your kids enjoy that experience? Were they like, was that amazing to them? Has that changed their trajectory, so to speak?
It definitely shaped their trajectory because they both went into marine systems engineering and they both work on big ships. So what they learned from that trip is how much they liked, even with all the differences and the modern conveniences that had come in the intervening years. People are still resourceful out there. You still have to figure out, the more stuff you have, the more stuff you have to learn how to fix. And they met people who built their own boats, who were always, they appreciated learning how things work and keeping things working. And that's what they came away with, that they wanted to know they wanted to have a hands-on life. It wasn't going to be in books, and it wasn't going to be abstraction with computers or anything. It was going to be hands-on. And that's what they both did. So now they both work on the big ships, and they actually make a much better living than I ever did with the small boats. And but it wasn't always great. The older son loved it right away, but the younger son resisted it. He wanted to he was a middle schooler. He just wanted to be back with his friends. But in the end, he ended up loving it as well. So it just took him longer to realize that. Nicholas liked it right away. But the difference was they were both, you always remember yourself better. So I just remember being a lot more engaged and interested and thinking, wow, what a cool thing this boat is right away, like standing watches, learning how to pull up the sails and navigate. I was just interested. I remember being interested in it. And obviously I was, because my dad saw that and gave me that. He capitalized on that by giving me the chance he did, because he saw that. And they were just a lot more like, mom will do everything. They'd get up when I'd ask them to do something, but it wasn't like self-starting interest. My boys, the apples of my eye.
Oh, that's awesome. I just think of boys in general. That sounds like a lot of us back at that age, where you're just like, yeah, mom will do it for me.
And you'd think they'd start becoming a little neater, picking up after themselves. That's what you have to be on a boat. Nah, just whatever. I took care of them here. I was going to take care of them there. I was just the caregiver. And here we are having a boat experience now. It's like when we did a cross country trip in the little car every night. I had these visions, and you have these like ideas that the kids are going to get out of the car and go set up the tent while you went. I just did everything, and they'd sit there and read, whatever. So you're stuck between nagging and being the constant nag, or just like letting it go.
In the middle of the ocean, was there anything that ever surprised you? I think it was the Saragossa Sea. I hope I pronounced that right. Like where you talk about the seaweed. Was there parts with the dolphins or whales or wildlife that just like stuck with you over time?
There are definitely moments that I remember where they're just the whales that came or the huge pods of dolphins that would follow me for hours. There were also the puzzling times where there'd be these like really weird tidal or current rips in the middle of the ocean that just were inexplicable. Like there's just some phenomena out here that, I don't know what it is, but you pass over it and then it would be over.
When you mean that, do you mean like the current, the way the waves are moving and like the
Yeah.
water?
Yeah. And that would be in a largely windless place too, because you don't see that stuff when the waves are big. You don't see the little differences in the texture of the water. So it would be largely windless. Yeah, but there'd be like riplets or different waves, or you could see just where the one water was going one way and in the other. You'd pass over these lines of currents. And it's a huge, like the Gulf Stream. I guess I didn't spend that much time in it. I spend a lot more time in that now because that's off the East Coast, and I do a lot of offshore East Coast passage making. And there you see just there's the Gulf Stream is a river, and you cross a river when you go across it in the middle of the ocean, and it's cool. It's mighty.
Yeah, certainly an experience like to actually probably feel that.
To know it, and sometimes to feel it, sometimes you don't feel it, but you know it. Like the weather will change too, and then the way weather would change also coming out of the doldrums, for example, and back into the trade winds. There was one time, there are these just moments, like one time it was in the doldrums and it was maybe right on the cusp of the trade wind area and the doldrums, and we were, it must have been, it was with the boys, actually. It was with that trip. There was it was the edge of the doldrums, and all the clouds dropped down. It was all the puffy little white clouds that normally are up in the sky. They were like just hovering above sea level, and we were just sailing. That was a very surreal. That was one of the cooler memories I have. Inexplicable too. Like all the clouds were just right above the water, and we were kind of just sailing through these like little puffy clouds. It was beautiful and surreal.
I gotta ask about like storms or thunderstorms. You mentioned earlier that it wasn't like it just popped up on you. You could see it coming for quite some time, which I assume had to be a different type of suspense because you can actually see it slowly entering closer and closer and closer to you. But like when you talk about battening it down and taking the sails down and everything else, like when you're in the middle of something like that, are you just basically cork just kind of bobbing and weaving on the waves? Was there a little more strategy to it? Uh, and how
Well,
bad did it get?
a thunderstorm or a squall, as you say, you can see it coming. Sometimes they go around you. They could be pretty localized or small, or sometimes it would take up the whole sky. But like you said, you could see them coming, and there was time to take down a bigger storm or a bigger system. It wasn't something that you just saw coming at you. The weather changed, everything changed, the smell, the pressure dropped. You knew there was something bigger out there coming. The thunderstorms were just something that you could ride out, take down the sails, it would pour and it would pass over, and then the trade winds would fill back in behind it. But yeah, when I had the storms, which happened on occasion, where it'd be a day or two of just lots of wind and big waves, the boat was closed up and I would sit down below, and I had self-steering, which worked with the wind. It was a mechanical thing that steered the boat the whole time. I wasn't out there steering the boat for 2.5 years. I never steered the boat, in fact. It was always that mechanical self-steering gear. And so I'd set that so that the boat was pointed as close to the wind as possible so that the waves were coming more off the bow, and just rode it out, sat down below, did the reading and the knitting and the crocheting and writing letters down there. And, probably not a lot of cooking, but It was like being in a blender. You got tossed around a lot, but that's just ride it out. I was a little cork. Varuna was a little cork out there, and she'd just shake off the waves and I'd pick things back up off the bed and put them back on the shelves and keep going. It was also wet. It wasn't like I was in my dry little cocoon down below. It was always moist and damp, and there'd be that smell. There's a smell that I'll get every once in a while again that'll just bring me right back there, like of battery acid and metal, like a metallic, stormy smell.
So you didn't have a dry place then?
No, that wasn't my life. Most of those 2.5 years were not very dry. It was a very small boat. Those waves would just plop right into the cockpit very easily. Didn't even have to be rough weather, nice weather too.
So in the middle of a storm then, or even through the night maybe, were you constantly having to pump out things?
I'd go out and pump the bilge frequently. But she was tight out. She was watertight. It wasn't like waterfalls of water coming in the boat. It was just these steady drips and just the moistness of being so close to the water all the time. It was just a damp moistness that was never ending. Sometimes downright wet.
What was your longest stretch out at sea?
The North Atlantic, that was 50 days. That was the longest ever. I've never done longer than that.
And what did 50 days do to you?
Yeah, like we said before, things become relative out there. So it was, it could have been 2 weeks, could have been 3 weeks, could have been 4 weeks, could have been 7 weeks, as it turned out. It just, time just slowed down out there. And I've described that plenty too, about how it was the first couple days that were the hardest, which were the withdrawal from civilization, because we're so accustomed to being surrounded by all our sights, sounds, smells, everything that comes with being on land. You don't realize how much it is part of your life until it's taken away, until it's gone. And you have to go through, I had to go through withdrawal. It was like stopping smoking or something. I was agitated, emotional, just on edge constantly, weird dreams. But that would last about 3 days, and then that withdrawal would pass, and then it was just, okay, here I am in the middle of the ocean with that, again, that clarity. I gotta head west, gotta make miles, gotta stay the course, gotta watch the weather, and make my meals, hang out with the cat, read some books, whatever. It just, the days melted one into the other. I was always marking time too. So the other thing was, leaving New York wasn't about going around the whole world right away. It was more about getting to Bermuda. It was passage by passage. And that's kind of how I faced, the months, was passage by passage. Okay, first I had to get to Bermuda. Now I got to get to St. Thomas. Now I got to get to Panama. Now I got to get to the Galapagos. So it was like broken down into those smaller passages / challenges. And then on each of those passages, I broke down the time into increments, like 4-hour daily into days, and then 4-hour increments in the days. So every 4 hours, I crossed off that time. I would make these like tiny little charts on the side of my chart or in my logbook or just in a scrap paper. And I would just cross off those 4-hour increments. And the more I crossed off, the more time was behind me and the less time was ahead of me until the next landfall. So the whole trip was kind of compartmentalized into 4-hour increments. That was another coping thing. I used to do that with my mother also, unfortunately. When I'd go visit her, being with her was not easy. And my visits with her, I would break down also into little increments I'd cross off. And then I think about that now as a mother, how heartbreaking that would have been if she saw that, if she noticed it. But it's this too pass mentality, and that helps it pass by being able to cross off the passings.
Yeah, a way of tracking your progress out on the ocean, at least. I get that. The world is a big place, and if you didn't have that to do, it could look like you're pretty much moving nowhere. And
I know.
that would be defeating, I would assume.
I also do that on my trips now because I lead trip. I take people. I regularly do the Bermuda back to the East Coast passage every year, and with the people, I set up a watch system so they know when they're on and off, and then we cross them off. So we can, and I know pretty much, okay, this trip's supposed to last 5 days at the most. So as you get close, you can see how much you've crossed off in relation to what you haven't. And everybody gets to have that feeling of seeing it go, of the, marking time.
So for
Like a prisoner, right? It's like being a prisoner. You're a prisoner on the wall. You're just marking time on the wall, check marks. Otherwise, yeah.
For a woman who had hardly been on the sea or on a sailboat at 16, it's become your lifelong passion then.
I guess. Like I said, I don't feel like I have huge passions. I look at people with passions and I know that's not me. It's just my job. It's what I do. I went sailing. I did this big trip. I wrote about it. And so now I write, I continue to write and I continue to sail. And I do a bunch of other things too. It definitely made me resourceful, made me be able to figure out other things. So I take care of people's properties, and now I take care of my father actually. So I've had to learn all about that too. Taking care of all his business. So he lives up the road from me. We've come full circle. Now it's my turn. The kids are gone and now I got my dad.
I find that interesting that you don't. I guess when I listen to you talk and the story of sailing around the world, you could have easily just not sailed again. Like, I mean, obviously you enjoy it, and maybe passion isn't the right word, but the fact every year you go back out on the boat and you're making passages and you took your kids and you've done multiple sail trips, or tons of sailing. Now, I guess you've framed it different than I would. I would frame that as definitely a passion because you're doing it, whereas you look at it as a job, and I find that interesting.
It is. It's kind of like I guess it's maybe I got this way from being on the boat, but just taking things as they come. It's like I didn't go out and look for these jobs. People have called me and said, "Do you want to do this?" And so I do it. I did take on the trip with the kids. That was completely motivated by me and pulled together and everything. But that was for my kids. It wasn't for me. It was partially for me. I wanted to have that experience with my kids, but I really wanted them to have that too. So without the kids, I wouldn't have done that. I did end up getting another boat. I had this dream that at 50, I was going to do the Great Circle route. I did want to go back out to sea. I love it out there, but I love it here too. I'm kind of surf and turf. But I did get a boat, and then the plan was to take a year and do the Great Circle and just have kind of like the beginning of my life started off with all that time at sea. I kind of wanted to bookend it with the, midlife 50. Now I can have all that time at sea to process and reflect and remember, because you never have that time to really follow a thought through on land like you do at sea. At sea, you really have time to dream and think about things. It's a huge meditation too, is a big part of that. Or that's what I remembered, which is probably different now because nowadays I'd have to go out there and be sure to let people know I was still alive with some device or whatever. And my days wouldn't have been spent wondering where I was with the sextant because I have a GPS, whatever. It would have been different, but still it's a long meditation out there. But then I didn't do it. First of all, I had my own little health issue, and then my dad. It became clear that I couldn't just leave for a year, that somebody had to take charge. And that's what I did. So that's how I had that boat, and I did sail it a bit here on the East Coast. I brought it up from the Caribbean. So I had one more solo passage from St. Martin up to Bermuda. That was the last one. And then I sailed it around here. And then it was when I wanted to sail it back to the Caribbean to sell it. That's the trip that my son ended up not doing.
You talk about being on the water for long periods of time as a form of meditation and getting to follow a thought through to the end. Was was there different thoughts then that you meditated on while you were on the trip that you got to think through?
Not deliberately, it just happened. I mean, you don't there's nothing but time and loneliness and space, and you cut off from all other distractions other than what's the most immediate. Yeah, I was able to probably, I'm not going to analyze myself till the cows come home, but I definitely was able to work out a lot of the childhood stuff up until that point. We had a bit of a crazy upbringing, and to be able to work that all out in my head. And then my mother died while I was out there too. That was a big one. And then another huge piece of it was coming home and writing the book about it. Figuring out what that whole story was about and what was important enough to put into words and make a story out of it, to find the beginning and the middle and the end to it all, which led to another beginning.
I should say your book is fantastic. It is a very easy read.
Thanks. That was a huge part of the trip too, was to sit down and do that book. That may have been the best part of it. I had Bernadette with me. She was the best teacher. We worked together and very closely for a year. It was another meditation. I was at home, but now I didn't have to worry about leaks. I could run the water. I could take a nice hot shower. I could have a laundry machine. All those things I dreamed about for 2.5 years, I now had and we lived in a basement apartment. Olivier complained bitterly nonstop about how could we be in such a beautiful world on the boat and now live in a basement. I was like, that basement's not leaking. Everything works. I can flush the toilet. I loved our little cave down there. And I spent that year writing the book in it and remembering and looking at the pictures and rereading the letters and the logbooks, and it was all fresh still. I was able and then take that and integrate into it the story of the life that led up to it. Helped really sort things out. Got it all neatly sorted out so I could move on.
Well, with roughly 5 minutes to go, I'll bring us to our final segment of the podcast. It's Crude Master Final Five. Just 5 questions, quick or as long as you want to go. If you could, I enjoy this. It's been something that I stumbled into, and I've really enjoyed tracking down different stories from around the world. If you could sit down and pick the brain of somebody, who would you take?
Dead or alive?
Sure.
I'm not sure. Who do I have that? I don't. Probably one of my kids. I'd love to know what goes on inside those meatheads. What's inspiring me? What inspires me is what I don't know. That's a tough one. It's a good one. I'm not the inquisitor. I'd rather sit down and just have a conversation with somebody. And there's many people, there's many writers, there's people who've written books. I don't know. I can't think. If you put me on the spot, I'll think of something later.
Sure. If you could travel back to your 18-year-old self before or maybe in the first alone day and just hop aboard the ship for 10 minutes and impart some wisdom, what wisdom would you impart on yourself?
I guess I'd impart the same wisdom on myself throughout life, to not spend as much of it as I did, being angry. Try to subvert the anger. I'd be angry at my parents, angry at the past, angry at the situation, whatever. I had a lot of anger to work out, and probably say just let it go. It's a waste of time. Doesn't do any good.
What while you were out at sea and had no contact from the world, what's one of the biggest events when you got back to land that had happened?
One of the biggest events?
Yeah.
Like world events while I was out there?
Yeah.
I think out there, Chernobyl happened.
Chernobyl happened?
Yeah. I think that happened in 80, right when I was in Tahiti. I think that's when that happened. Um, Pretty sure that happened, but we could Google it. But that was a big one. And then I had actually the big thing that happened with my friends is I had friends in New York when I was part of my teenage a big part of my teenage years were these friends that they became the Beastie Boys. They while I was gone, they got famous. So that was big on a personal level. When I came home, I had friends that were just like,
You know the Beastie Boys.
yeah, that was part of the crowd. That was our crowd. We were the Beastie Girls.
That's epic. I mean, that's pretty cool.
I don't know. I loved reggae. Peter Tosh died while I was out there. That was a big one. What else
Well,
happened?
I mean, Chernobyl and the Beastie Boys, at least for my sense, those are pretty big. I was just curious when you came back to land and we're like, oh, that happened? Like Chernobyl's a big one. What? My buddies are famous now? They're singing all over the US and the world. That's pretty big stuff.
Of course, I heard about it. People would write to me and stuff. It was in April '86. Exactly. Chernobyl.
Wow.
Haley's Comet happened while I was out there too. But that was disappointing. I thought I'd see this comet streaking across the sky, and it was just a fuzzy star.
No, that's pretty good.
That was the big one. My mother died.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, that
But that was
how about a book suggestion? You talked that your entertainment was reading books. Do you got one book from back then or a couple of books that like really stick out, or even now? Do you have a book that really grabs your attention?
I could tell you the books because there were books that I'd read that really like one passage would be flavored by that book. That book was the book that gripped me. I was in that world because books are transporting. So The Mists of Avalon was a huge one. It was about King Arthur's days. It was from the point of view of Morgan Le Fay. I was just like in King Arthur's world out there in the middle of the ocean. Tessa the D'Urbervilles was another really big one. That flavored my one passage in a big way. Let's see what else. Nature's End was another one. That was a scary book about, climate change actually back then already. It was a dystopian book about that. I didn't love it, but it was definitely a book I felt proud of reading and getting through. It was a big slog, just like that passage I was on too, because I had to cross the doldrums. That was a slog, but Les Miserables. I read that one. And I read a lot of pulpy books too that were just quick reads, tons of them. I calculated once, and I did write down a lot of the books that I wrote, but I calculated that I read something like 360 books while I was out there. So
Your
that was a lot of.
Your final one. You've seen different parts of the world, been through some crazy things along your trip and along life. And I always look for people's truths. And maybe there's a truth you took that developed that was common amongst all the different stops or out in the ocean or what have you. What's one of the truths you took from your trip that that you took along with life or took into life?
Oh, well, I also repeat it often. People are good. A big question that I've gotten over the years is, did I ever have a problem because I was a girl alone out there? Never. And even the one time where I thought maybe I came close to having a problem ended up being a connection I've had in the years ever since, in a really good way. People are good. People want to help. People are kind. People are generous. That's the reigning trait of humanity, is goodness. And we ever more and more are being told to forget that it's not true. We're being more and more polarized in many bad ways, I think, that make us forget that. And especially with these dumb little phones, we're losing the chance to experience that. Now you don't ask people directions anymore. You have a map all the time. You don't have to stop and talk to people. You can find out answers to everything on your dumb little device. It's robbing us of our connection with people too. It's telling us about our relationships. It's not letting us live them.
I couldn't agree more. And
I hate it, and I'm addicted to it also at the same time. We don't have a meeting anymore where it's like a question can go unanswered. We're going to have the answer right away. Look, I just found out when Chernobyl was. I couldn't even trust my memory. I knew that okay, now that I'm saying it, was it Chernobyl then? Let me check. 2 seconds it took me to find out. Yeah, it did happen.
I couldn't agree I couldn't agree more with what you just said. I 100% agree with the phone. And here's the thing. You're not alone in being addicted to it. It's hard to have access to knowledge like that just sitting inches away from your fingertips if you just take the 2 seconds to type it in. And yet, when I come into this space, other than being able to use the technology to reach people, I try and turn everything off so that I can engage fully with the person on the other side, because that engagement doesn't happen anymore on day-to-day basis. It's actually pretty rare. It's a rare thing that I try and get a lot of by doing these talks with different people, and it's a lot of fun.
Passages too with the boat. Maybe that's partly what attracts me to the trip, to being at sea still with other people, is you just have those days with other people. You get to talk to them, you get to know people, you really get to know other people out there, which is why I wanted to have the trip with the boys too, in ways that we just can't anymore. So many things pulling us apart and distracting. And
the world is a fast moving place, and it just keeps getting faster.
and you have to be a special person and be able to pull away from that.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me this morning. This has been thoroughly enjoyable for myself. I hope you enjoyed sitting down here as well. And just thanks for doing this with me.
Well, thanks for having me. I hope I didn't look like I was being tortured or anything. It was fun.
No, not at all. No, like I say, I've really enjoyed sitting across from you, and wish you the best in what comes up next for you.
Thank you. You too. This is cool that you've done this. Like I said in the email, that's inspiring too. That you had an idea and you followed through. It's big. Cool.
Thank you. Hey folks, thanks again for joining us today. If you just stumbled on the show and like what you hear, please click subscribe. Remember, every Monday and Wednesday, a new guest will be sitting down to share their story. The Sean Newman Podcast is available for free on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you find your podcast fix. Until next time.